Hello, Kids Cook Real Food listeners. Katie Kimball here for the Healthy Parenting Connector. And as always, my job is to connect you, parents who so desperately want to raise healthy, independent adults, with the experts who have the information you need. Today, we are talking about literally connection. The topic couldn't be more perfect for the Healthy Parenting Connector. I'm honored to have as a guest Jennifer Kolari, a child and family therapist, and she is the founder of Connected Parenting. Thank you so much for being here, Jennifer.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
I first heard Jennifer on the Broken Brain podcast, and she used this analogy of someone getting on a plane and the pilot asking all these questions like, where would you like to go? How high should I fly? Would anyone like to try to fly the plane? And the analogy was to show parents that when you kind of give kids too many choices in the realm of parenting, things that should be on your plate as a parent, they get anxious. Because if you're a passenger on that plane, you'd feel very anxious and you would want to bolt. And I loved that analogy. I love the whole interview on the broken brain, but I've used with credit that analogy often when I teach about picky eating, because that's a trap that parents of picky eaters really fall into is, oh, well, what do you want to eat? And we're trying to serve them, but it doesn't serve them. So we're gonna dive into that
Sure.
and more today. I'll do the official intro so you know who you're listening to. As I mentioned, Jennifer Kolari is a child and family therapist. She's one of the nation's leading parenting experts and highly sought after international speaker because of the beauty of this tool that she's discovered called Connected Parenting. She has busy practices in both Toronto and San Diego. I don't know how you split between places so far away. And she's written a couple cool books: Connected Parenting, How to Raise a Great Kid, and You're Ruining My Life, but Not Really, Surviving the Teenage Years with Connected Parenting. Jennifer is a frequent guest on many national morning shows, and her advice can be found in tons of Canadian and US magazines. She educates audiences with her powerful parenting model based on the neurobiology of love. I cannot wait to dive into that today. And as you'll see in a moment, her wisdom, quick wit, and down-to-earth style helps parents navigate modern-day parenting problems with real-life examples and practical, yes, and effective tools and strategies. So we got to start at the beginning. Like, what in your upbringing or maybe your personality led you to become a therapist? And then why did you choose kids and families?
That's an interesting question. I can't even answer that. I just always knew. Does that sound weird? Like even as a kid, like some people play teacher, I played therapist. Like I always knew that I wanted to do this. By 15, I was absolutely sure that I wanted to do this. And it's just something I pursued and have loved ever since. So yeah.
That's really impressive. You just have that heart of a helper, right? Heart of
Yes,
wanting.
I think teachers are born, therapists are born, doctors are born, nutritionists are born. Like when it's your calling, you just know it, I think.
Did you always know that you'd want to focus on kids?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. And that's probably an influence of my parents. My parents were both teachers and they were both amazing educators, like really, and they just had this magical way with children. And that always inspired me. So
That is so cool. Now, connected parenting, not something you were taught in your degree program.
no, not at
You
all.
sort of discovered this. So tell us, like, what is connected parenting? We'll start with the definition, and then how is it different from other parenting styles?
Sure. So, connected parenting is really about helping parents to use language and love as medicine and using connection itself as a really, really powerful way to give your kids all that they need to do well in life, like to really have that emotional resilience and know who they are. And it sounds easy, but it's not that easy. So I teach parents literally through conversation and the calm technique, which we'll dive into, how to de-escalate children in conversations, how to build them up, um, just how to handle conflict in ways that's medicinal, that really helps the child grow into who they are. And I think that's really important. And also, and back to the plane analogy at the beginning, and I'll just sort of speak briefly about the brain here. We've got the frontal lobe and the midbrain. Frontal lobe is the part of the brain that mitigates, organizes, prioritizes, switches attention, all that stuff. It takes 25 years to grow one of those. The midbrain's job is to freak out. Now you're me, not now. Why? That's what, our frontal lobe goes off and our midbrain comes on when we yell or get upset in the mornings or whenever we get upset. So that really leads to the next part, which is you're not really parents. You're actually substitute frontal lobes. You are the frontal lobe for your child until they have one on their own. And that sort of in there lies the hardest part of parenting. You are a prosthetic frontal lobe. It is your job to mitigate, prioritize, inhibit certain behaviors, and it's their job to push back. You're mean. Nobody else's parents does that. She did this to me. He did that to me. And your job is to kind of manage all that. And that's the trickiest part of parenting for sure.
Well, especially if you're struggling with your own frontal lobe remaining in control, right?
That's true. That's very true. We'll touch on that today for sure.
Okay, good to know. Now, what types of families, what types of kids is connected parenting perfect for?
So it's really perfect for all families. I mean, it really is. Love is just this universal language and it's medicinal for everyone. And connection, which is the antidote to addiction, I mean, it's really, really an important thing. And it works for everyone. I've had families say to me, like, how does this strategy work on everyone? Well, the same way water works on everyone, right? The same way food works on everyone. It's something that we all need and we all understand. So maybe I'll talk about how connected parenting came to be, because that might kind of touch on this. So many, many years ago now, way over 30 years ago, I had finished my undergraduate degree in psychology and I wanted to get out in the real world and do some real work. And I ended up signing up to work at this group home. So this is a group home for street kids. Kids in there were 11 to 16 years old. All of them had been runaways, and the majority of them had actually been involved in sex trafficking. So they'd been pulled off the streets. They had what are called Romeo pimps who pretended to love them and care about them, and then after a while put them to work. So they were deeply traumatized. They'd all had horrendous backgrounds. And by the time they came to this setting, they were really suffering. There was a lot going on. We were taught in this group home to be very military and follow the rules and don't get sucked into their behavior and don't get too connected to them. We were literally told, don't connect to these kids because they're not here very long. And it just makes it harder on them. And none of that made sense to me. These are children who'd been through terrible things, who were in a strange setting with grownups who are paid to be there, going to sleep at night, lonely and afraid, and I couldn't do it. So I basically started really connecting with these kids, especially at bedtime. And keep in mind, these are very tough kids. Like the makeup is on during the day and they're really sassy and they've, very behavioral and they're really tough and they knew how to say provocative things to freak all the staff out. But at night,
these boys and girls or just females?
Boys,
okay.
Boys and girls. Yeah. And at night, though, the teddy bears came out and the makeup came off and the jammies came on and they turned back into children.
Wow.
Those were the moments where I'd spend a little bit of time with each of them, and I would sit on their beds and I'd sing them lullabies and I'd rub their backs and I'd tell them bedtime stories. And these tough kids would melt into this beautiful bedtime routine. Now, here's where the magic happened. The next day, when I needed those kids to do the things that I needed them to do, they were much more likely to do it for me. All of a sudden, I was seeing healthy compliance, not fear-based compliance. They were doing it because we had a connection. They were doing it because I cared about them and they cared about me. And it's funny because it got the staff in a bit of an uproar. Oh, she's a bleeding heart. They're going to walk all over her. This is going to backfire. This is going to make it harder for us, blah, blah, blah. And the truth is, it didn't backfire. Like really, even the toughest kids were much more likely. It's not that I didn't have issues with them, but for the most part, we had a very different connection and relationship. And it was really interesting. And I think I might have told this story on the Broken Brain, but there was one kid in particular, this sort of captures it for me. She was very tough, like really behavioral. Kids, the other staff were quite afraid of her. She was only there for about a week and a half. She was probably loved this bedtime routine the most, which is surprising because she was just absolutely tough as nails during the day. She was leaving to go to another setting, and she kind of stopped before she got in the car. I was on the porch, saying goodbye to her. A couple of other staff members were too, and she paused at the door before getting in. She turned around, she ran up the sidewalk, she put her hands on my cheek, she looked right into my eyes, and she says, I just want to thank you. This is the face of someone who actually cared about me. And then ran back into the car and drove away. And I was a mess. Like I was just blown away by that moment. And that moment was really a moment where I realized, okay, this is powerful. This is huge. This is where my work is going to be. I want to know everything there is about this. Went back to school, did my master's degree in clinical social work, and that really kind of set the stage for connected parenting.
Wow. The systematization in that center of disconnection it kind of feels like a pit in my stomach,
Yeah.
right? To say it, can you imagine in any other setting in a family to say, well, you know, you're all going to die someday. So why love each
Why
other? Because it's
bother?
going to hurt more, right? Or something that's
Yeah.
goofy. It's goofy to
It's
say don't love because it will hurt when it ends.
Yeah, it's crazy. And we were really taught that. Now, I also know that I'm sure those staff members believed that that was better, that, ripping out those relationships and starting something. And it was, I don't think it came from a place of, we're going to make these kids miserable. I think it really came from a place of this, they're hoping to do the right thing. But that happens a lot with us as humans. We end up getting kind of misguided sometimes. And I think the end result was, it was very difficult for those kids. And it was, because I really do think that in that moment, and I can think as a school social worker too, these little moments that you have with kids where there's connection, even though that person leaves your life, they stay in your heart. Like I'm sure you can remember teachers or coaches or people that you had years ago, and something they said to you, some kind of moment
Right.
of love and belief in you stayed with you your whole life. So
Yeah, it changes the child. It changes the child. Let's think about those changes. I kind of want to start with the end in mind, with the goal in mind. And so you've talked about the really tough kids. Most of us don't have that child in our
yep,
family. We have a variety of other, difficult and challenging and lovable situations.
yep.
What can parents expect that their 16 or 18-year-old, sort of going off into the world, leaving the house? What qualities would a connected kid have that a kid from another family who maybe didn't connect as well doesn't have?
Yeah, I think they would have kind of a sense of self,
Hmm.
a sense of loving themselves, an anchoredness about them. I would say definitely an emotional resilience. So emotional literacy would be in there, an ability to kind of, I guess, realize that you can't really control the conditions in your life, but you can control your response to those conditions. You can hear my dogs barking in the background. Sorry. Yeah, no. Um, and that gives them this idea that, I can do this. I'm enough. And that's huge.
Yes, that is huge. That is huge. Now you teased us about the brain, and my brain is a little bit stuck there. So
Mm-hmm.
we've got the neurobiology of love. I know was in kind of your bio, and you
Mm-hmm.
told us we talk about the brain. Feed my brain, Jennifer. Tell us how
Okay.
our neurobiology works with parenting.
Okay. I will definitely do that. So we talked about the frontal lobe already. That's a very sophisticated part of the brain that takes a very long time to develop, 25 to 30 years, actually. Then there's the midbrain. That's the part that freaks out. That's the security system in the brain. It is only interested in danger and survival. That part of the brain has no ability to decide what's an actual danger. It just automatically reacts to that danger. It's the job of the frontal lobe to mitigate that. Oh, there's a snake, but you know what? We're in a zoo and there's a snake handler there. We're going to be okay. It's the brain's ability to kind of mitigate and take perspective in any situation, which is why as parents, that's our job to do for a long time with our kids as they're developing. And children, they have big feelings. Even kids who don't have, let's say, behavioral issues or aren't really the challenging child or a gladiator child, as I like to call them, it's still really hard for them. Their feelings are much bigger than can fit in their little bodies, and things are a very big deal for them. And they haven't had that life experience to go, okay, so my ice cream falling on the ground sucks. It's not really very fun, but in the scope of things, it's not that big of a deal. Like they haven't lived long enough to even know that, right? So that part of the brain is really important. The amygdala, which is there's two sort of almond shaped organs right in the middle of the brain. The amygdala's job is to just scan constantly the environment for danger. It's always working in the background. And then if there's a bang or a noise or something frightening, then the midbrain actually takes over and overrides the frontal lobe. So that's really important. Now the other thing that's important is when you are connecting with your baby. So let's say you have a brand new baby They do not have the brain is not fully formed in utero. It actually forms outside of utero. Most of brain development happens outside of utero, not in. So there's only kind of a rough map laid down for the brain prior to being born. The rest of it is built with our help. So we are not only are we substitute frontal lobes, but we're the architect of our children's brains. So the experiences that they have, the environment that they live in, what they learn about their world and getting along with people and their sense of self, that's all programmed by us. And we have brains that are programmed by our parents. So these are programs, which is something really important to think about. When you are interacting with an infant, some pretty amazing things are happening. So when you look at a baby and you go, oh my goodness, look at you, and you're making little faces, see what happens? You get a little warm, little rush, right? That's oxytocin. Oxytocin is a very powerful reward chemical, probably one of the most powerful ones, if not the most powerful one. There's also serotonin, there's other ones. What oxytocin does is it speeds up neuroplasticity. So it helps that little brain grow, actually any brain grow. It strengthens the immune system. That's pretty important in today's world. It mitigates and inhibits cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. That's what causes us to get anxious and worry and stress and gives us stomach aches and makes our heart race and puts us into fight or flight. Oxytocin lowers cortisol, which is really, really important. When you interact with anybody that way, not only does that brain get those beautiful enhancing reward chemicals, but your own brain gets it. So you're medicating yourself as well in those lovely moments. And it's free and you don't need a prescription and you can't overdose on it and you can't run out of it. So that's the best news. And that's really the medicine part that I was talking about. And serotonin is also in there, natural opiates and endorphins. These are just lovely reward chemicals that feed the brain. So we start to kind of shift how we interact with our babies. So most of us know exactly how to talk to a baby. We don't need lessons on how to speak to a baby. We pick up the baby and go, my goodness, look at you. And we don't pick the baby up and go, so how you doing? Like there's this natural kind of flow that happens, but we start to drop that at around the time of language acquisition. So I usually give an example of a baby in a bath. So let's say you have a 4-month-old, they're crying, they're fussing, they're cold, you've taken them out of the bath and they're not happy. Most of us intuitively know to look at the baby and go, oh my goodness, you're cold, and look at your little, your cheeks are flushed and your teeth are rattling or whatever's happening. And you're like, oh my God, we have no trouble doing that. But when our 2-year-old gets out of the bath and they're fussing and whining, now we shift it. Now we say, you're fine, get your towel, you're going to be okay. Why are you whining? There's no reason to do that. Come on now. We start to tell our child that what they're thinking and feeling is no longer valid. And we do it all the time. So what connected parenting is about, it's like bringing back that initial connection. So with your 2-year-old, you say, you know what, I get it. It's so cold and it doesn't feel very good when you've been warm in the bath and now you're cold on the outside. Here's your blanket. And then you can say the stuff around, but you got this. You can do this. There's big hurts and little hurts, and this is kind of a little one and you'll be okay. Then you can help them be the frontal lobe and kind of mitigate that. So that in a very basic form, that's the idea. And that carries, by the way, all the way through, right through the childhood years. And the bonus is this isn't just for your kids. This is for husbands and wives and mother-in-laws and neighbors and colleagues. And this is actually a skill that goes well beyond parenting.
And yeah, so let's this is what the CALM calm technique is, so that we can all remember it better for all of those situations. And I'm going to ask you to walk through those, but just when you describe that situation, the 4-month-old in the bath and the 2-year-old in the bath, I feel like somehow our empathy breaks.
Yeah.
Is there a reason in our adult brains that we have this hard cutoff that we treat the kids so differently and our empathy breaks?
I think it's language, because I think if you had a 2-year-old that didn't speak very much, you would probably do more of the mirroring, because you have to communicate through your feelings and through emotion. And as soon as words take over, that tends to take us in a different direction. I think also, like, let's be honest, parenting is hard. Okay? It's really hard. Even if you have really easygoing kids, One's doing one thing, one's doing another thing. You got 50,000 things on the go. You got laundry you got to do. Just get out of the bath. Like, come on, why does this have to be like? So you end up really just it's a time management issue. Kids have their own agenda, and we talked about kids having big feelings. So some kids can just have a full-on meltdown.
Right.
They're cold, and it's like, oh, really? It's a bath. You'll be fine. So I think part of that is trying to just manage in life. And so the technique really just brings you and grounds you back again to the emotional part of the connection. And then usually when you've done the emotional part, they're like, okay, fine. And they walk out of the room. Okay. That's the really interesting part. It actually changes behavior when you start with connection.
That's so cool. All right. Walk us through CALM.
Sure. Okay. So the calm technique, there's 4 things that you're going to do when you're deeply listening to another human being. So we'll use examples as kids, but think about how this could be true with your siblings, with bosses, with anybody. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to connect. You're going to take your agenda. And most of us enter any kind of conversation, especially if it's a heated one or conflict, with the agenda of, I want you to understand me. That's usually what we end up doing. And that's usually not the best way to get into a conflict. The best way is, I want to understand you. When you seek to understand instead of be right, you're already changing the conversation in many different ways. So the calm technique starts with that connection, with that, I want to understand you before I give you my point of view, before I tell you why I think this isn't going to work, before I show you what I've already learned about this. Let me just sit with you in this place and understand what you're going through. Because every human being, and especially children, if you do not understand them, they will up the ante until you do. They will get louder, they will get madder, they will cry, they will use a plethora of circumstances to show you why you're not getting them. And so you're going to have an escalation in the conversation until you actually get that. So that's the first thing. You're going to take your agenda and you're just going to park it. I promise you get to bring it back. Your substitute frontal lobes, you have to bring it back. It's just you don't start with that. You start with creating safety in the conversation first. The next letter is A. So this is affect matching. So this is where the look on your face kind of has to match the look on their face, but it can't be exact. So I've probably given this example a million times, but it's a really good one. Let's say you have a little child and I don't know, they were, I don't know, at the playground or something, and they came home and said, oh, and they're 5. Julia loves me and I'm so happy, but then I got really sad because it turns out Julia loves Josh. And you do that, right? You're like, oh, that's so cute. This has nothing to do with what your child is feeling. Okay. They're feeling really sad about that. And so when our affect doesn't match their affect, they're either going to feel invalidated, hurt, misunderstood, or they're going to up the ante. No, you don't understand, mommy. She loves Josh and she told me she was going to marry me. And it's still the cutest thing you've ever heard in your life, but there's still not this match. Now you don't want to go overboard and go, what? Julia loves Josh. That's terrible. That's a whole other thing. That's weird. Don't do that. But what you genuinely want to do is step into that child's experience. He's only 5 and he thought Julia loved him. And so you want to be like, oh, you really thought she loved you and you had this lovely time together. And like, you want to just be present. Right? You don't make it about you and you don't overreact either. You just have a moment where your child feels deeply understood. Then you can bring in your teaching. Then you can bring in the frontal lobe and the moment. So the affect matching is actually really important. This is the most interesting part, the L. This is where you can choose your words. Okay, so it's very much an affect-based technique. So it's not so much about the words. It's not what you say, it's how you say, right? That's really important. So so this is the listening part. You can paraphrase. So if we're using the example of your 5-year-old who's, been thwarted in love, the first part is, so you're really feeling like Julia loved you and she promised you something. And now she's saying the same thing to Josh. Okay. So you can absolutely paraphrase. You can just sort of take the words and move them around a little bit. You can summarize. Didn't this happen last week too with so-and-so? Like you can find a situation that's actually similar, which helps your child realize, mommy or daddy actually listen to me. They're actually paying attention when I tell them things, which is a really important thing towards resilience as well. You can clarify. So this isn't a particularly emotional response. It's more like, okay, so what was that like when that happened? And what did she say exactly? And how come that felt so bad for you? Help me understand that. So you're just picking a detail with a little bit of urgency that actually helps you understand. And for kids who are very, very sensitive and highly emotional, sometimes that little aspect of mirroring can work, or the calm technique can work the best. Because sometimes if you're reflecting the emotion back too strongly, it's almost like shining a flashlight in their eye. There's a bit too much glare and they can get more upset. And then the final thing is wondering out loud. So maybe whatever happened is more about the birthday party that your child didn't get invited to, or that they got left out of something that his sibling didn't invite him to. And you can say, so that happened with Julia, and you do all the mirroring and you're like, but I'm wondering if this is also really sad because of what you told me this morning, that you didn't get invited to X, Y, or whatever. Now the child makes the connection between these feelings and what's happening to them and the event, right? Because often this can happen to adults too. We'll feel the physiological feeling in the body of having an emotion, but we won't necessarily know what that emotion is. And this is what I meant by emotional literacy. So you're really helping your child to learn that emotions are language, that emotions are information. They're not to be feared or ignored. They're to be integrated and understood. And that's the gift that you give your child as an adult when they take this forward with them. And ironically, it's also the gift that they'll give to their children one day, which is really important. And then the M, of course, is when you've pulled that all together, which I know sounds a lot easier than it actually is to do. You've had a really powerful mirroring moment, which is where the medicine is.
You know, back in the C, you said, it's not about you. Think about the other person. Like if every adult in the world could actually behave from that simple line of text, right? Like we would have no problems in the world.
Can you imagine how the world would change? That's why, like, our secret agenda at Connected Parenting is if we could change the world one family, one child at a time, that's pretty awesome. And if you think about it, like as a world, as a country, we can't figure stuff out. But the truth is, if we can't figure it out in our own homes, how are we going to figure it out on a grander scale? So we are literally, you are doing something incredibly divine when you are making your family a beautiful place where anger can happen and upsets happen. We don't want to raise our children so that nothing ever goes wrong and no one ever yells. That's not real. That's not life. It's to help them deal with the fullness of everything and be good humans. That's the greatest gift we can give the planet.
Absolutely. Now your example was a 5-year-old, and we know that the toddler brain and the teenage brain develop, more quickly than any other time in our development.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about teenagers. They're a different beast.
They are.
You can't quite use the same tones of voice. Can you give us a teenage calm example?
I can, exactly. And it's funny because when I was developing the connected parenting model, I was actually thinking to myself, it would probably work better with little kids and not as well with teens. It's the opposite. This is literally teen whispering, because every teenager wants to be understood. They are going through a state of development where they're becoming sovereign. They're figuring out who they are. They're figuring out who they are different from who you are. They want independence. They want freedom, all of those things. And and this is the hard part, because teenagers don't have a fully formed frontal lobe yet. They're intelligent and they're smart and they have opinions and all kinds of things, but they don't have a fully formed brain yet. You still have to perform that function of keeping them safe. And their job is to push back hard. You can't tell me what to do. I'm 15, I'm 16. You have no right to tell me, and door slam and all the rest of it. So there's going to be a big pushback from your teenager. But when you seek to understand, when you truly seek to understand and understand what they're meaning and how important freedom is for them and how important it is for them not to feel controlled, now you're having a conversation instead of a confrontation. So it is literally teen whispering. Now, I will say in both cases, but especially with teenagers, it is a highly counterintuitive technique. Nothing in you as the parent is going to feel like trying to understand your teenager when they've just told you to shut up or leave me alone and slam the door. Like you're going to want to go in, how dare you? I do so much for you. I don't deserve this treatment from you, blah, blah, blah. That's what we're going to feel like doing. So it is the exact opposite actually of what your limbic system or your midbrain is going to be telling you to do.
Right.
But this is where you have to do your most brave and exquisite and loving parenting. Your job is to love them. Their job in this moment is not to love you back. Their job is to figure out who they are. And it is an act of absolute devotion and self-love, but that is a phase you need to go through. So I'll say a couple of other things about teenagers here. The word teenager, which is coined in the 1950s, wasn't even a thing prior to that. Okay. Yes, teenagers and adolescence is not a developmental stage. It is a Western phenomenon. So in most cultures of the world, think about it. You're a kid till you're about 13 or 14. Then you're an apprentice adult. You're pulled into the adult community where you're kind of accepted in, and we know you're still just 14 or 15, but this is how adults do it. And you're who you're identifying with and wanting to please and the community you're wanting to be part of is actually the adult community, not other teens. Teens will find each other, and there's certainly a part of that. And so many, many years ago, that's how it worked. People finished, 8th grade, and they either went on and worked with their uncles in the field, or they helped their aunts and their mother and their older siblings doing whatever. And the idea was that you wanted to prove that you were an adult. In fact, I think it was girls, they had something called a trousseau. It's like a trunk where they put all the things in there that they were going to have when they were a full adult. They sort of built this. And there was this idea, right, that you were aspiring to be an adult, and you were going to prove that you could do this. And I'm going to prove that I'm a man, and I'm going to prove that I belong here. And then when high school came along, which there's nothing wrong with high school, it's definitely an important thing. But things started to shift so that the community became other teenagers with maybe one adult at the front of the classroom who changed all the time. And teens started to identify with each other, which is great. And teens definitely need each other, and being, having a strong peer group and belonging there is incredibly important, but there's no frontal lobes in that. Right? So you have a bunch of teenagers thinking something's a really good idea, who think adults are idiots and shouldn't be listened to. And that's a bit of a problem. So there's been this really interesting shift. So the long answer to this question is, the more connected you are to your teenager, the more you're still present when they make these decisions. Now, you can't follow your teenager around. That's weird. But you go here in their heart. So when they go to that party, or they're off in the park with a bunch of other teenagers, and you drop them off going, now you better do this. And when I was your age, and you make them mad. They stop it. You're so, well, mom, like, why do you do that? Nobody else's parents do that. You're so weird. Stop it. Don't you talking about, if they leave the car like that and somebody says, hey, do you want to try this? And they're mad and they feel separated from you and they feel disrespected, they're going to go, sure, let me see. And that's where that rebellion comes from. If you have a conversation where, hey, go be a teenager, you do you, I love you, I trust you, I know that you make good choices, you are well loved, and I know you got this, and I know you're going to make really good choices, and they go off and somebody says, hey, you want to try this? They're either going to say, no, thanks, or they're going to try it a little bit and be like, eh. Wow. Right? That intense bond is strong enough that you go with them everywhere.
We need to just sit with that for a second. Like the juxtaposition of those two conversations, those car conversations, right? When I was a kid, do this, do that, da, 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 right? Like you're almost pushing them off a cliff.
Yeah.
And then how many of us, I mean, parents, just sit with that for a second. The words that came out of Jennifer's mouth, whether you think they work or not to, guide your teen's behavior, how many of us want to be able to say, I love you, I trust you, go have fun and be a teenager? Like, don't you desire that? Oh my gosh, parents, that's so beautiful.
Yeah. And that's where they'll make good choices, right? Because they feel valued, because they feel like you respect them. And teenagers are mostly kind of sort of honest. Like their job is to individuate. And sometimes they do that by not telling full truths and things like that. But when you're close with your teenager, they'll come back and go, Mom, I didn't tell you the truth. I was actually here. And I used to love when my kids are all much older now. My youngest is already 19, and my son's 28 and my daughter's 27. And
Mm.
if they did anything like that, they would have to tell me. Like, and it was so cute. Like, and I loved that. And we kept communication open, and they were able to ask advice and tell me things that they were worried about and thinking about without worrying, this would happen. And you end up kind of stirring in them is their own sense of right and wrong, and their own sense of being out of alignment with themselves, which is really, that's the greatest gift right there.
Yeah, we want to raise healthy, independent adults, not children we need to follow to college. I always say you're not going to go to college and cut your kids' meat. So let's figure out how between the ages of 2 and 18, they can take some of those kitchen responsibilities, right? That's what I do. And you're saying everything else. How do they learn to think for themselves? How do we pass on our values instead of that group of teenagers imprinting on each other? Who knows what, right? Let me give you just a real simple, it's almost a non-emotional example, but emotions with teenagers can come up anywhere. Let's say a teenager has 3 chores they need to do on the weekend. How would a connected parent remind that forgetful, no frontal lobe teenager of the 3 chores they need to do by the end of Sunday?
That's a really good question. And teenagers, it's very rare. I mean, there are teenagers who like to get their chores out of the way and not think about it, but most of them have time blindness. So they're going to do it, and they have every intention of doing it. They just don't realize that so much time has gone by. And why are you bugging them anyways? Because they're going to do it, right? And you end up with this conflict. The best thing to do with teenagers is to give them windows of time. So this chore, you have these 3 chores that need to be done. And this is the window of time that it needs to be. It needs to be done by Sunday at 6. It needs to be done in the next 3 hours. They like to have perceived choice. So if you say to a teenager, please do it right now, you know what you're going to get. I will. Or leave me alone. I will. Stop it. Don't bug me. I'm going to do it. Right? You're going to get that
teenager voice. Yeah, it's very sassy, very lippy.
So you're going to get that response, which of course is very triggering for us. Are you kidding me? Do you know how much work I do all day? This is the one thing I ask you to do. You end up back, and it's very valid. It definitely feels disrespectful when you know how much work you're doing. And this, it's one simple thing you're asking to do, or in this case, 3, but give them that time. So, but always mirror, say, hey, you've got these 3 chores to do. I know chores are annoying and you've got a million other things to do. And it's my voice bugging you about it. So I'm giving you this window. This needs to be done by this amount of time. And here's the kicker. This is the important part. I trust that you will do it. I know that you will. When you hand that over to them, they're much more, and now you have to zip it, because they will probably do it right before, like right at the last second, but they'll do it. And what a lot of parents say to me is that upsets them. They're like, why did they do it at the last second? Well, because they felt they had sovereignty there, right? They felt like they had a little bit of say in when they do it. But when you give that window, when they're doing it at the last minute, that's fine. It's still within the window.
So apparently the way I tackle my to-do list is as a teenager, because I'm always the last second on everything. So, frontal lobe in Katie's brain, still working on that time blindness.
I love it.
What if they miss the window? What if it's 6 o'clock Sunday, or it's 7 o'clock Sunday and 6 was their deadline? Do you come back? Like, I like how it felt like you were narrating your parenting, which I like. There's no, the curtains are open. Kids can understand your thinking. Now they miss the deadline. What do you do?
They miss a deadline. So first of all, that needs to be pre-loaded. That needs to be front-loaded. So you need to say to them at some point, if it's not done, please know that you are choosing the following consequence. Now, a consequence and a punishment are 2 very different things. Okay. A punishment, you hurt me, I'll hurt you. You did this to me, I'll do this to you. There's no learning in a punishment. Punishments come from fear. Punishments are anger-based. It really, they're not helpful. And that usually just causes your child to go, yeah, well, I'll do this because you did that. And you just end up in this like crazy back and forth thing. Whenever you parent from a place of fear, it usually doesn't work very well. When you parent from a place of love, that's where it works. So when you're sort of anchored in, you know what, my kid's a teenager, they're pushing boundaries. I'm going to love them enough to set a consequence that's going to help them build that muscle of doing things that they don't want to do, because that's a really important muscle to have in life. And I'm going to love them enough, and they're going to have a yucky reaction back, but I love them enough to do it anyway. Now you're going to be in alignment. And by the way, your children know the difference. They will respond very differently. When it's coming from a place of love, anger, fear, they're not going to respond as well. When it's just this solid, you know what, I love you enough for you to be mad at me. You be as mad at me as you need to be, but this is what's going to happen. You chose this. There's going to be a very different response from your child, right? So
Right.
that love-based, fear-based thing is really important. So you front load that and you say, if you don't do this, this is going to be your consequence. And that's based on a conversation that you want to have with your kids around, especially your teenagers. You know, they have rights, the right to food, healthy food, the right to education, basic clothing, security and a roof over their head, medical care, love. Those are all rights. The rest are privileges, right? So your phone and the internet and being driven places and all those things, those are privileges, right? Those are earned. So their job, their full-time job is to go to school, have a few chores, and be a reasonably decent human being in your home, right? That's their job. Their payment for that job are those privileges, right? Your phone, you know, being driven places, access to video games, whatever you allow in your house, and those kinds of things. So, and teenagers don't understand this. If they have a phone, they believe their phone is a right. It's not a right. It's definitely a privilege. So, and when your children are younger and they get a phone, when you give them the phone, don't say, here's your phone. Here's my phone that you can use, right? And you can draw up a contract. So the consequence then for not doing the chores is they lose their phone for part of it. And it doesn't have to be for 2 weeks. Don't take things away forever. Take it away until they do the chore.
Sure.
That's it.
And in how many families, I think, do the parents think that is too difficult to take away, right? I think a lot of parents, from a kind of disordered view, see the phone as a kid's right, that I couldn't touch that. It's going to be a power struggle. But yeah, you're right. You got to set it up at the beginning as this is, I love that it's a privilege and it's your payment for being a reasonably decent human being.
And you're not taking it away. You're saying, put it on the counter. And when you finish the thing, then here you can have your phone back. It doesn't have to be a whole thing. The other thing too, is because teenagers like Windows, it's really important to say, show me for a week or two that you've got this chore thing down. And if you do it at the last minute, you do it at the last minute, but you're part of this family. It's part of how you show love to all of us. It's part of your responsibility. It's part of, becoming an emerging adult. If you can take care of this stuff for 2 weeks and really not have, and it gets better and better, fantastic. Then everybody's happy. If after 2 weeks, the chores aren't getting done, nothing's actually happening, they're not getting done at all, then you're telling me with words that you don't need my help, but you're showing me with behavior that you do need my help and you still need me to be that frontal lobe a little bit. So then we're going to step in and we're going to give you consequences. But see how there's such a sharing of power there, because you're giving the child the opportunity to fix those things and learn that skill and build those muscles. And it is, if they end up losing the phone or the drive to whatever it is, it's their choice. And they say, oh, you're so mean. Why are you mad at me? I told you all you had to do is this, and then you'd have that. Still don't understand why you chose that. Right? Allow yourself to be taken out of it. And some kids don't need consequences. Like, honestly, my older two, I don't think I ever had to really use consequences. My 19-year-old, yes. And she actually was happier and was in a better mood and felt so much better. Because the analogy that you opened up with, the airplane, if you're on a plane and the captain is asking you, what do you think? Like, do you want me to go 30,000, with this bad turbulence? I could go, you're like, are you kidding me? Plane? Are you nuts? Right? Or let's say the captain's in there yelling and screaming, and just for the sake of argument, the cockpit door is open, and then, why is this red button flashing? And why is the control tower answering me? You're going to be petrified as a passenger on that plane. Like, ultimately, your children want to know that they are loved, and limits are also love, right? So that when you're doing some of that frontal lobe stuff, then they're free to just go about the business of being kids and being teenagers within that containment, and they can be really happy. And most kids, teenagers included, really thrive when there is a container, when they know what those limits are. Otherwise, they spend an extraordinary amount of time pushing on those limits.
Right.
and
To
pushing
figure
you. And
out
then
where they end.
exactly. And
It's
then
their job.
yes, and then they'll push past those limits and feel terrible about themselves because they
Mm.
don't like it behaving that way. They might tell you that in the moment, but I talk to teenagers all the time. And yes, they're talking about, the things that teenagers face in social media and experimenting with things and where's the line and all of that stuff. But the most of the time they're talking about their parents,
Mm.
their relationship, whether they feel loved or not, or believed or cared about or valued as much as their siblings. They still very much need that container.
Such a good
Absolutely.
reminder. Well, and let's pull back too and just remind parents that this takes our intentionality, this takes our frontal lobe, this takes our cognizance, right? Like you have to really make a choice to explain the situation from the outset, see where your teenager, or your child, your toddler, whoever might miss, let them know what the consequence is for missing, right? Or if there needs to be a consequence. But also, this is not a system of discipline, right? Jennifer did not just teach you how to get your kids to do chores in the absence of the rest of your life, right? This works when you are connected.
Yes.
That putting your phone on the counter could be a huge power struggle and maybe even a physical altercation in some families, and lock boxes and a hot mess
Yeah.
of back and forth yelling and all those things if the kids are not connected to the parents already, right? That's the foundation.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you can get stuck in that cycle very easily. And teenagers have big, big feelings and emotions too. And so do we. And so if your child doesn't put the phone on the counter, you don't chase them down the hall and grab it out of their hand. Like you just, you do what's called minimum maximum. Okay. It's on the counter until the chore is done. Then you can have it back. And if they're screaming and yelling and swearing and being, really abusive and awful, then it's a maximum consequence. Well, I love you. This is not true to who you are. You always mirror first. I get it. This is frustrating. We're telling you what to do. Like always use the calm technique first. And then say, but we love you enough to really show you how important this is. You cannot treat other human beings like this, especially your parents. And so now the phone's gone for 2 days. Don't take it away for 2 weeks. Take it away for 2 days. And then if they don't give it back, you call the phone company and you say, hi, we've lost our phone. We don't know where it is.
Turn it
And
off.
you turn it off. And they'll come, you mean, you're crazy. You made the choice. This phone is a privilege. It is not a right. It is a privilege and it is yours. And you can have it back when you stop calling me this name and when you've done what you need to do. And I love you enough to go toe to toe on this. That's how much I love you, because this is an important thing for you. This is helping you to be a good human. This behavior is not good human behavior. I can't condone it. Right. And that's what I mean by being in this like really strong and loving place.
Yes. And these are such great scripts and little lines and snippets that we can use. And I also love that you're using a very measured tone, but you do start out with sort of a realistic tone, right? Like you're not this parenting instructor who says words in this tone of voice that no parent can ever access when they're in the room with their child, right? Like you're just like, you're
And if you
real.
want to piss off your teenager, use that tone.
Right. That's as bad as yelling in some ways.
It is, definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
Well, before we run out of time, Jennifer, we got to talk about food a little bit. We're all about food, teaching kids to cook, picky eating and meal times.
Yeah.
So as a therapist, how do you recommend families use food and meal times to connect?
Oh, it's probably the most important time is mealtime, right? That's really where bonding is. There's lots of studies that actually show that it's incredibly important to mental health to have families sit down meals together, and also meals where the children are collaborating and helping and feeling a part of it. Even little ones can do little things, setting the table or stirring things. And so I do think that's really, really important. And as a therapist, I usually recommend that's not the time at the dinner table to have conflict, to remind your kids of the things they need to do, that there needs to be this lovely kind of love zone where you can talk about your day, things that are great about your day. You can goof around and have some fun, but it's not a time to do any what I call hard parenting. Now, remember, you guys have to, like, it really needs to be a joyful time. If you do have older kids, and this is also for us, I think having a basket at the door where phones get turned off, or at least the ringer turned off and they're thrown in the basket, is really important, because you don't want faces at the down on the screen in the dinner time. That's really important. I think mealtime battles, fighting over what your kids eat and what they don't eat. We don't, and I'm sure you talk about this all the time. We don't want to be associating drama and power plays and pleasing or not pleasing parents by what they will eat or not eat. You don't want to be connecting those things to food. And I just find in my practice in particular, we work with all kinds of different families, but we specialize with what I call gladiator kids. So these are kids who are just sassy. They're just like, why? Why would I do that? They have a very strong counter will. They push back on the world in really strong ways. I personally believe they're going to save us all because we need humans who can actually bust down paradigms and figure out how to work in the world, but have a voice and have a say. But they also tend to be pretty picky eaters, a lot of them. And they will eat basically only white food, like rice, bread, anything bland, and anything else is suspect. And you can get into some real kind of mealtime battles over that. So it's definitely a thing. I certainly keep a list of foods that have passed the picky eater test, because I'm very big on kids, especially kids who are highly sensitive and are gladiators, having a protein snack every hour and a half to 2 hours. That has a huge impact on behavior and emotional regulation. Huge.
Makes total sense. I was just thinking, like, my new goal needs to be to nourish the gladiators, right? If they're going to change the world, they better have some vitamins, minerals, and nutrients to fuel them.
When a gladiator gets hungry, they get cranky and nasty, and they get aggressive sometimes, or no talking, or I'm talking like that. And you'll tell them, I think you're hungry. No, I'm not. But really they are. And you just give them 3 bites. I call it the 3-bite rule of something that has a protein. So just a carb or a fruit by itself won't do it. It's got to have the protein in it. And that absolutely has that and sleep has a huge impact on behavior.
Oh, so fascinating. At all ages.
Yes.
We're not just talking about teens here. I get in school a little bit with my youngest is 2nd grade, but I tell you, you can look at some 1st graders and they tell you they go to bed at 10 or 10:30. And I think, honey, this is why you're struggling to emotionally regulate or regulate behavior.
Oh my goodness. Yes. And it's funny because it's and food and meals too, but that parents being the frontal lobe. Kids are up way too late. Way too late. They need someone in grade 1 is still needing 11 to 12 hours of sleep. They need to be asleep by 7:30, 8 at the absolute outset. And you'll see so a lot of behavior is nutrition and food, and that getting that steady insert of protein and sleep. Those 2 things.
Yeah, I love that. And honestly, teaching your kids to connect those things as a cause and effect relationship is really important. We talk about that a lot in our own family.
Intuitive eating and intuitive, like knowing when you're tired. Absolutely.
Oh man. Well, this has just been fascinating. I know that many in our audience are going to want to hear more from you. So buy the books. Only 2 though. It's been like more than 10 years.
It will never be a 3. It's so much work writing a book. I never want to write another book. It was a lot of work. I love it. They're done. And they're fabulous. I like podcasting. I like doing online courses. I like continuing to be out there and do speaking engagements.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're always educating, but no more books. That's good to know. So just get the 2. You won't be sucked into, spending $100 a year on books. What about now? You said you do some some classes. I love your connected parenting master class. Do you want to give us a little preview, a little whet the appetite on that?
Yeah, so we have like a number of tiers of services because we really are like true to our agenda. We really do want to help families, and some families can't afford very much. So we have my podcast, which is I give a lot of really good practical information away in the podcast. The books, of course, are another great way. I have another podcast too called the Mental Health Comedy Podcast, where I work with Ed Krasnick, who's a comedian. And we actually interview pretty well-known comedians and entertainers about mental health. And that's very practical and gives you lots of strategies as a parent too on how to regulate your own emotions. So you can do this calm thing, which is very hard. So there's that. And then there's we have 2 master classes. We have one that's just video. They're all on demand. I think parents should keep them for life. So they don't, you're a parent for life. You should have the stuff for life. And parents are, watching it over and over again and watching certain modules over and over again. So it's me sort of directly sitting in front of you and teaching what I would teach a family that was right in front of me as a private client. There's another version of that class. This is the master class we're talking about that has a video, that has a monthly coaching call component. So I'm actually interacting with people, and those calls are amazing because they're parents from all over the world. And you
Oh,
see,
wow.
oh, it's really the same. Doesn't matter where you live. It's all the same stuff. So that's really fun. So I'm actively engaging with the community. And then there's a closed Facebook group there as well, where parents help each other, support each other. And I will often go in and answer questions, either written answers. Sometimes I'll do video answers and audio answers. I'm pretty engaged with everybody that's kind of going through this process.
Nice.
Because as easy as it sounds, this is it's a tricky technique, and it takes some mastery. It takes some mastery for sure. Oh, and then we have something called the Village, which is really cool. So it's a monthly subscription. So parents join, and once a week you sit down with at least 2 connected parenting therapists or parenting coaches in a community setting, asking questions and practicing the calm technique. It's a great place to actually practice it, because it's not as quite as easy as it sounds. And that's an amazing supportive community for sure. I think that's everything. Yeah, I think that's everything.
So good. You connect parents with each other too, which is great. Now, I always try to end with like, what's the one step that parents should do today? I feel like it's going to be the calm technique. Maybe I'm picturing myself like I need to write it down with a pen or a marker on a piece of paper and just sort of put it somewhere where I will see it multiple times a day and like let it sink into my brain. So let's just recap. CALM. What are those for the last thing we hear?
You're creating connection. You're moving your agenda aside. You get to bring it back after you've finished this technique. You're going to affect match. So your face is going to look similar, not exact, but similar to the person you're talking to. You're going to use language. You can use, you can summarize, you can clarify, you can wonder out loud, you can paraphrase. Those are the 4 things you can do. And then the M, of course, is mirroring. So you're going to do that first. And what I usually encourage parents to do is don't wait till their kid's upset. Be like, oh, this is great. I can't wait for my kid to throw a fit so I can use this. Like, that's when you're going to be least able to do it, right? When they're complaining mildly about something, or they're excited about something, or they've drawn a picture, instead of going, oh, that's really nice, let's put it on the fridge. You go, whoa, look at the way you've got the sun shining through onto the sword, or whatever you think your child has put into the drawing. Really practice it in a conversational, or what I call chit chat mirroring way. And that actually builds the neural pathways in your brain. So you're actually practicing it enough that when a more escalated situation appears, you're going to actually have some hardware that can actually help you do that. And I would say go back and listen to maybe either the Broken Brain podcast. I go into more detail than we were able to today. I think that's like a 2-hour long thing. And also my podcast, the Connected Parenting podcast. Like the first 2 or 3 episodes are really breaking this down for you.
Yes. Start at the beginning of that one. It's so good. Well, that was just practical and perfect. And I love the reminder to practice the technique before it's needed, before a situation escalates. Thank you so much, Jennifer Kolari. That was one of our longer interviews, but you're just so fascinating, and it's such important information for all of our parents.
Awesome. That was really fun. Thank you.
And friends, I'll see you back next week for another episode of the Healthy Parenting Connector.